TV7 Israel News is made possible thanks to your generous donations. Shalom, good evening. This is TV7 Israel News broadcast to you from Jerusalem, and in today's top stories. The United States vetoes a UN Security Council resolution that effectively delinked demands for an immediate ceasefire for Gaza from a demand for the release of all 101 hostages from Hamas captivity. The Iranian proxy Hezbollah cast doubt on the feasibility for U.S. mediated efforts to reach a ceasefire for Lebanon would bear fruit. IDF Chief of General Staff Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi reasserts that the IDF will continue to fight Hezbollah until all of Israel's displaced residents will be able to return to their communities safely. The Palestinian bid to outmaneuver Israel at the UN Security Council had failed when the United States rejected efforts to delink demands for a Gaza ceasefire for the release of the remaining 101 hostages who've endured 412 days in Hamas captivity. The draft resolution S/2024/835 was championed by Algiers, with backing from the other 9 non-permanent members of the Security Council, to include Ecuador, Guyana, Japan, Malta, Mozambique, the Republic of Korea, Sierra Leone, Slovenia, and Switzerland. And while France, Britain, and Russia have a number of their respective nationals held hostage by Hamas in Gaza, the only nation to stand up for their own citizens in captivity was no other than the United States of America, which vetoed the resolution.
As follows: 14 votes in favor, 1 vote against, 0 abstentions. The draft resolution has not been adopted owing to the negative vote of a permanent member of the Council.
We made clear throughout negotiations we could not support an unconditional ceasefire that failed to release the hostages. Because, as this Council has previously called for, a durable end to the war must come with the release of the hostages. These two urgent goals are inextricably linked. This resolution abandoned that necessity, and for that reason, the United States could not support it. Simply put, this resolution would have sent a dangerous message to Hamas. There's no need to come back to the negotiating table.
While Russia cynically pointed at the humanitarian conditions in the Gaza Strip, China merely utilized international fora to bash at the United States.
The
U.S.'s long use of the veto has dashed the hopes of the people of Gaza for survival, pushing them further into darkness and desperation. I said during the Council's debate on Monday that every moment will be recorded in history and will be judged by history.
We
could have demanded today an immediate and unconditional, sustainable ceasefire in Gaza, as well as an immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. It is unconscionable that the U.S. would cynically stand in the way of demanding such actions to save lives in the world's worst humanitarian crisis.
For Britain and France, whose own nationals are suffering in Hamas captivity, they insisted that the resolution adequately addresses the imperative to release the hostages immediately.
We deeply regret that it wasn't able to be adopted today. The humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip is disastrous, and it continues to worsen day by day. International humanitarian law has been trampled underfoot. Under these conditions, the only response would have been and remains an immediate and permanent ceasefire.
The UK remains resolute in our call for an immediate ceasefire, the immediate release of all hostages cruelly held by Hamas since the 7th of October 2023, and urgent action to address the humanitarian crisis. the deterioration of the humanitarian situation in Gaza is catastrophic and unacceptable.
Israeli ambassador to the world body, Dani Danon, following Washington's decision to veto the resolution, accused those of promoting the document as pushing for appeasement that rewards Hamas and abandons the hostages.
Let me be clear. This is not a resolution for peace. It is a resolution for appeasement. It abandons the hostages, rewards Hamas, and emboldens those who believe that violence can achieve their aims. To the nations supporting this shameful text, how will you explain to the families of the 101 hostages, some of whom are citizens of Security Council members, that their loved ones are not worth demanding freedom as a condition for a ceasefire?
Meanwhile, in Washington, State Department spokesman Matthew Miller explained why the United States had opposed the resolution at a time when both the United Kingdom and France, whom also have respective nationals in Hamas captivity, voted in favor.
What is objectionable to us is that it calls for Israel
an immediate ceasefire and the immediate release.
It calls for an immediate ceasefire, and we don't think that Hamas, if you get, because let's be clear about when people talk about an immediate ceasefire, what they mean is they mean for Israel to immediately stop fighting. You think Hamas is going to respect a UN Security Council resolution calling for the release of hostages? No. We don't think they are at all. So we think that if you're going to see, we think because we think they ought to be linked together. Because so then you get international support. Hold on, you can get international support, get the backing of every country in the world behind this proposal, behind this position, which is the one that the president outlined back in May. That we did get a Security Council resolution that we supported. We think that's an incredibly powerful way for the world to speak, and we're disappointed we couldn't do it here.
In other news, U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein believes that progress had been made in efforts to reach an agreement between the Iranian proxy Hezbollah and Israel that will ultimately end the war in Lebanon. Prior to traveling to Israel last night, Hochstein held 2 consecutive days of extensive discussions with Lebanese Parliament Speaker Nabil Berri, who represents Hezbollah in the U.S. broker negotiations with Israel.
So I know this will be disappointing to a lot of people here, but I'm not going to negotiate this in public. So I'm not going to go into what the issues are. I was here, we discussed it here as planned. If we made progress, I would go to Israel and make those additional discussions there based on the conversations here and see what we can do. Look, there is one president at a time. We're going to work with the incoming administration. We are already going to be discussing this with them. They will be fully aware of everything that we're doing. As President Biden said, there will be an orderly transfer of power, and I don't think that will be an issue here.
Well, Hochstein met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu earlier today and with Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer last night. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar addressed Jerusalem's position vis-à-vis Lebanon in remarks to over 100 diplomats residing in Israel, during the course of which he highlighted the presence of Amos Hochstein in the region.
With regard to the issue of Lebanon, we worked with the Americans, we are in contact with the Americans on a possible arrangement or agreement in Lebanon. And from the fact that Special Envoy Hochstein is in the region, you can conclude that the Americans believe that such an arrangement or such an agreement is possible. But the most important thing to emphasize is that we would like to reach an agreement that will stand test of time.
Jerusalem's top diplomat went on to stress that any agreement will be contingent on the IDF's freedom to act if Hezbollah were to breach the outline.
Unfortunately, Lebanon is a failed state, but we cannot pay the price in our security and the security of our citizens for their lack of sovereignty or concessions on the sovereignty, and therefore, in any agreement we will reach, we will need to keep the freedom of to act if there will be violations. And we will have to act in time before the problem will grow, because we learned something from the huge infrastructure we have found on the ground there in Lebanon and in Gaza as well. And after October 7, we will not let it grow again. We will not let it develop again to be a threat.
Meanwhile, in a pre-recorded statement from an undisclosed location, Hezbollah Secretary General Naim Qassem cast doubt on whether an arrangement with Israel is feasible, since the Iranian proxy evidently rejects Israel's demand to maintain the right to enforce the potential agreement.
وهذه الملاحظات قدمت للمبعوث.
And these comments were presented to the U.S. envoy and discussed with him in detail. We decided not to talk in the media about the content of the agreement or our observations. Let us leave this discussion calmly to see whether it will reach a result or not, because in the end the Israeli side expects to take from the agreement what it did not take in the field, and this is not possible.
بالاتفاق ما لم يأخذه في الميدان وهذا غير ممكن.
The main reason behind Hezbollah's rejection of Israel's demand is rooted in the fact, which Naim Qassem explicitly and openly proclaimed, in which Hezbollah will not abandon the path of violence versus Israel.
Today we are resisting in Lebanon in defense of Lebanon and in defense of the Lebanese people from the Israeli occupation, which will only leave by resistance and will only be defeated by resistance. And we will continue in this manner, Allah willing.
Meanwhile, deep behind enemy lines in southern Lebanon, IDF Chief of General Staff Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, accompanied by Northern Command CEO Major General Ori Goldin and Israel Air Force Chief of Staff Major General Tomer Bar, stressed that the IDF will continue to fight until the residents of northern Israel can return safely to their communities.
Our mission here is clear: to return the residents of northern Israel to their homes safely. A lot of enemy exists here, which poses a threat on Metula and targets Kiryat Shmona, and in order to ensure the safe return of the residents of Kiryat Shmona, Metula, Misgav Am, and Kfar Yuval to their homes, for this purpose you are here, operating with determination and professionalism with substantial achievements, and that's important. Every infrastructure, like the weapons storage facility you showed here, and every anti-tank missile and surface-to-surface rocket post that is destroyed brings us closer to our goal, heavily damaging Hezbollah.
Thank you for watching TV7 Israel News. I would like to encourage you, pray for the peace of Jerusalem and salvation of Israel. Moreover, if you're blessed by our productions, which are exclusively donation-based and as such broadcast entirely free of charge, please consider making a donation. You can do so via our website at www.tv7israelnews.com. I'm Jonathan Hassan, wishing you an Erev Mevorach, and God willing, we will see you during our next update. Until then, Shalom from Jerusalem.